Finding Laura Bugs by Stanley Gordon West, Chapter 35, page 238. Bonnie acted as if we were going to a picnic as we hurried from the streetcar toward the house. I'd only told him I needed to get back in the house once more, and that I didn't have enough time to find what I was looking for. We'd been excused from our 2 afternoon classes thanks to the phony passes. Rita Reynolds, a sophomore who worked in the office 6th period, would intercept the passes before they got sorted into teachers' boxes. As we hurried along Herschel, I wasn't worried about getting caught skipping school. I was worried about staying alive long enough to serve time in 7th period. Donnie waited in the alley while I alerted Clara. In her husband's work shirt, suspenders, and pants, she took up her post with the dented old cavalry bugle. "This'll have to be the last time for this monkey business," she said. "My heart won't take it. If I find what I'm looking for, we'll be calling the police on your phone before the day is over." "Where'd you get the midget?" she said. "Oh, he's a friend from school." "Kindergarten?" Her laugh was more like a growl. Donnie decided he'd go through the coal door feet first this time, and I held the heavy door up while he slithered into the basement. I had a foreboding about doing it again, and I'd taken a few precautions. I told my mother I was staying over with Jean that night, in case I wouldn't make it home in time for supper. I hadn't told Jean what I was doing because I thought she might try to stop me. I told Jean my mother thought I was staying overnight at her house, so she shouldn't call me, that I wanted to watch Myron's house all night and I'd be staying at Clara's. If I got done in time, I could always show up at home for supper and tell my mom I wasn't staying at Jean's after all. After Donnie let me in, and I locked the door behind him, I watched him skip down the steps and walk off into the neighborhood as if he'd just pulled a fast one in wood shop or something. I felt a lump in my throat when he went out of sight, and I hurried to the fruit cellar and started digging. It was 12:54. I dug furiously, reminding myself that I was digging up my mother's grave, or my father's, and if I could find them, I'd have the police waiting for Myron when he came plodding home. The digging was easy. That ground had been opened up in the last few weeks. With every shovelful, I dreaded what I'd find. I worked for over an hour, the dirt piling high in the basement floor along with my panic. A clock somewhere in the house chimed the hour. I found nothing but an occasional rock in the sandy soil. It was humid, and even though the basement kept a coolness during the afternoon, the sweat was running off my face. My pleated skirt and short-sleeved white blouse was smudged. Twice I stopped digging when I heard something in the house, or heard the house. I'd hold my breath and not move for as long as I could, but nothing came of it. I crept upstairs and got a drink by putting my mouth under the kitchen faucet. My curiosity took me to the window to check the outside, and then I tiptoed up the wide stairway that had worn dark red runner. On the landing, a massive grandfather clock stood in the brass pendulum swinging behind the glass. There were several rooms on the second floor, large and small, and there had been some remodeling of the house, rooms made smaller by partitions that had newer paint and wallpaper than the ancient original. It was obvious from the accumulated dust that several rooms were unused. A large bathroom had one of those huge fancy tubs that sat a few inches off the floor on cast iron feet. There were several bottles of pretty soap and bubble bath and soft fluffy rugs on the floor. The room was fairly neat compared to the rest of the house, and had a stack of large pink towels. The bedroom Myron obviously used had clothes strewn over chairs, and the dresser, shoes and socks here and there. A large unmade bed seemed to sag in the middle from his large hulking body. Several other rooms had beds in various sizes that looked as if they hadn't been slept in for years. One bed with a frilled skirt and flowered pillows and spread had probably been his mother's, and appeared untouched since the day she died. Myron preserved his mother's memory by keeping her room as though she were still living in it, while Clara kept her dead husband around by wearing his clothes and smoking his cigars. Some neighborhood. I went through some of the drawers, but found only normal clothing and human clutter. I opened a door and found a stairway to the attic. The smoothly worn steps squeaked, and I complained, and I came up to the 3rd floor, and heat took my breath away. The attic was a disappointment, almost empty except for a few old trunks, piles of magazines, some forgotten furniture. Rafters slanted from all directions, with dormer windows, and I had to watch my head. The attic floor had become a graveyard for other carcasses, moths, flies, shriveled bumblebees that had been trapped in Myron's house as well. Cobwebs, mouse droppings, old hornet nests had taken over the place. I opened one of the trunks and found souvenirs from the army, uniforms, bayonets, old helmet. Another trunk was filled with worn and ragged children's toys, but nothing to incriminate Myron. I knew I was on the right track in the fruit cellar, and I fled the stifling, dust-conjured attic for the cooler basement. When I shut the attic door and tiptoed down the hall, I heard a noise. I froze. I listened. Nothing. I hurried to the basement and continued digging. I was down about 4 feet and working my way back the fruit cellar. The hardest part was finding a place for the dirt as I started piling it under the bottom shelves that ran the length of the fruit cellar. It was 3:56, and I hadn't found a trace of anything, and I knew I was close to the point of no return, that if I didn't start replacing the dirt in about 15 or 20 minutes, I'd never have it all back by the time he came home. Then I saw something in the dirt that made me swallow. It was a bone. I dropped the shovel and gently picked it out of the soil. A piece of thin, curved bone, old and fragile and crumbling. I'd been right all along. I sat at the edge of the hole and cradled the little bone in my hands. I thought it must be a piece of one of my mother's ribs. I broke down and cried, at first trying to be quiet and then sobbing out loud. I found what I never wanted to find. I lost track of time, sitting there with my mother's rib bone in my hands, imagining how I'd live for 9 months with that bone sheltering me from harm. But I knew I didn't have to put the dirt back. I'd run to Clara Singleton's and call the police, and my sorrow turned into anger and rage. I wanted to wait until Myron came through the front door and take a shovel to his head. I wanted to personally beat him into his fruit cellar graveyard. I scrambled out of the hole and trudged up the narrow stairway with the sweat running off me. As I shut the basement door, I heard the bugle blaring, Genga Hun warning me of the ambush with his dying breath. In the same instant, the lock on the back door snapped open with Myron Wilbershire lumbering with several books under one arm, head down. Shocked, senseless, I had a split second to duck into the narrow broom closet and pull the door close to a crack. I was trapped. In an instant I knew full well that if he caught me, I'd dug my own grave, and I'd join my mother and father, disappearing as they had in that unmarked family plot.